Hello! Today I'm going to do a start to finish digitizing tutorial. And just a reminder, there's never just one way to digitize an image. So if I'm using one method but you want to try another, by all means feel free to do so. And for this video, I'm going to digitize this Mimikyu Pokemon design, and it's going to be embroidered on a crewneck sweater. And before I get started on the computer, I'm actually going to go through my embroidery threads and pick out the colors that I want to use. And once that's done, I'm going to come to my computer, and I'm using Embrilliance StitchArtist Level 2, but you can pretty much digitize any design that you want with StitchArtist Level 1. And the first thing I want to do is make sure that the image I'm going to trace is the exact size that I want my stitch out to be. So I'm going to select the image, and I want it to be roughly 3 inches tall. Oops, not 13. 3 inches by 2.5. And then I'm just going to change my unit of measurement to millimeter just because it's a little bit easier. It gives a lot more detail with the grid. And now I'm going to go into create mode and start digitizing. So when I look at this image, I know the first thing I want to do is the biggest shape, which is this yellow body color. So I'm going to press 6 on my keyboard to zoom in, and with that, each of these boxes represent a millimeter. And I'm going to go ahead and make a fill stitch, so I'm going to click draw with points, fill stitch, and I'll just go ahead and update the color, press OK. Now, if you're completely new to this and you don't understand how fill stitches work, I do have an entire video that goes over how to digitize fill stitches. But if you want the lazy version, basically whenever we create a shape with a fill stitch, we have to take into account the push and pull compensation. So basically any areas of the shape that are along the width, we need to make it a little bit wider because when the machine sews, it'll pull the shape inward. And any part when we approach the top or bottom, we actually want to come a little bit short of the shape because the machine will push the threads outwards. So again, if that's confusing, I do have a whole video that goes in a little bit more detail. But anyways, I'm going to go back, select my fill stitch, and I'm going to start drawing the shape. And I'm just going to click around tracing my image. Whenever I approach a corner, I'm going to hold Control on my keyboard to make that sharp turn. And here I am. When I'm approaching the top, I'm going to come a little bit short of it. And then for the width, I'm going to come a little bit wider. Again, holding Control to turn a corner. And I usually don't worry too much about the shape being perfect on the first pass. I will go back and clean it up later. I'm not going to include the tail in this shape because I think I'm going to use a darker color. To be completely honest, when I'm working with shapes where I'm not worried about it being super exact and perfect, I don't always pay super close attention to my push and pull compensation. So you may notice at times that I may be countering what I'm teaching, but I will go back and check my embroidery design before I try stitching out to make sure it's as accurate as possible. So when I finish the shape, I'm going to right click to close the shape. I'm going to press 1 on my keyboard just to zoom out and take a look at it. And now I'm going to adjust the settings. So I'm going to click the shape. I like to bring the density usually up to around 5 points, especially if it's a bigger shape. It just saves thread and it helps the design to not be super dense. I like to use the traditional tatami pattern, and for length, I like to bring it up to somewhere between 4.5 and 5. Again, it just saves some thread. And then for the underlay under this third tab, I'm going to adjust the density all the way up to 32. Again, I think just the standard setting is way more dense than the shape needs to be. And I'm going to go back and look at my shape and make sure that I'm happy with it and adjust anywhere that I need to. If you ever want to remove a node, you can just double click it, and then if you want to add a node, you can double click on the line. Okay, I think I'm pretty happy with that. Again, I'm going to press 1 on my keyboard to zoom out. And just to be able to see my base image again, I'm going to click this eyeball so I can plan my next steps. And I think the next thing I'm going to do are these dark shadow areas. Click the eyeball again. I'm going to zoom in. I'm going to use the fill stitch again, so draw a point, fill stitch. I'm going to update the color to my darker color. And I'm going to trace these dark areas. And this is another one of those parts where I'm not too worried about it being perfect. Right click to close, 1 to zoom out. Because this is just a shadowy area, I don't think I want it to be a full density shape. So I'm going to click it and play around with the settings. I do kind of like the idea of making it a gradient because it sort of creates this etching effect. Yeah, I think I'm gonna try this out. I don't know if there's a gradient feature in StitchArtist Level 1, but if you want to do a similar effect, you can just manually digitize it. So you would select the draw point and then the line, and then you would hold Control to make sure it's not drawing a round shape, and literally just go in and click and manually digitize the sketching effect. Okay, so I'm gonna delete that. I'm gonna do the same thing with other parts of the shadow. Actually, I don't really know if I like that. Let me turn off the gradient. Yeah, I think I might try it without the gradient, and then I'll just make it less dense. I'm gonna do none, and then let me try making the density really loose, 9 points. Okay, let's try that. And honestly, I won't really know if I love this until I do my test stitch. And if I decide that after a test stitch, I don't like how that looks, maybe it needs to be more dense or less dense, then I would just adjust accordingly. I'm going to continue drawing the other shadow shapes. And if I ever need to see the image below, again, I'm going to press the eyeball. And because at this point I'm sort of just doing sketching elements, I'm really not paying that much attention to my push and pull compensation. Alright, so usually after I finish digitizing a color, I like to go back and check my start and stop points. So with this darker brown color, it's going to start here where this green tab is. I'm going to bring the red tab down here so it's closer to the next shape, which will start and end here. I think I'll bring the green tab a little bit up. Next shape will start here. Let's bring it down. Next shape, start here. Bring it down. Next shape, we'll start it on this end. And that's good. If I hold space and click and drag, I can see the red dashed lines, which is where my jump threads will be. Okay, so I'm going to zoom out and check on my progress. Click this eyeball. And I think I'm going to go ahead and do the brown shapes. So pressing 6 on my keyboard. Oh, I just realized I forgot to do this tail part. I wanted that in the dark brown color. So I'm going to do draw points, fill stitch, and draw the shape. And then this one, I don't want it to be the loose density. Gotta select my eyeball. So I'm going to bring the density back down to 5. And I want to make sure the underlays there, contour and perpendicular. Okay, and I'm going to move it in between these two shapes. So we'll go from here to here, and then to here. Okay, good. All right, now I'm going to do this darker brown, or this amber sort of color. Draw points, fill stitch, color. Use 1657. Okay, and where these two colors overlap, I want to make sure there's no gap, so I'm going to make sure that I overlap the shape that I'm drawing. Again, holding Control whenever I have a sharp corner. Right click to close. I think I want to give a little bit more room for the pull compensation. I'm going to double check the settings. 5, 5. Okay, that looks good. I'm going to press 1 to zoom out. And I guess I'll do the little circles on its belly. You can definitely do a satin stitch here. So you can just have the stitch going across like that. But I think I'm going to go with the fill stitch. It's just a personal preference. Either one will work. Because it's a small shape, I'm going to make the density a little bit tighter. So I'm going to bring it down to 4 points. And I'm going to make the length of the stitch a little bit smaller. I think 4 points is good. And then I'm just going to copy and paste it. Copy and paste, and then bring the second shape over. Alright, cute. And then the last thing I want to do with this color is the little bottom parts of his feet. Again, using the fill stitch. And here I want to make sure my colors are overlapping so I have no gaps. Oops. Gotta make sure to hold control. Okay, and now I'm going to make sure I like the order of the way that this color is stitched out. I'm not too concerned about it. I think I'm going to start with the little buttons. So I'm going to select these together and bring them up. So we'll start with this one, go to the next one, go to the tail, bring it a little bit closer. And I think I'm just going to go around this way. So I'm going to reorder these. So tail here. I'm just adjusting the start point so it's a little bit cleaner to here. Okay. Right now I'm a little bit concerned about whether I want this dark brown to be stitched on top of the body color, because I am planning to do this black outline to go over, so it shouldn't really matter. But I think just to be safe, I'm going to bring this like dark amber color up a little bit to be before this darker shade of tan. I'm going to select all of them, so I'm going to select the first image, hold shift, select the last image, and then I'm going to drag these up here. So I think I'm going to sew this body color first, and then all of these amber shapes, and then we'll go in with this shading detail. Depending on the image you're digitizing, you don't have to start with this biggest shape. Like if you want to stitch out this dark amber color first and then stitch this body color over it, you can definitely do that. I just think it's easier if you have registration issues to start with that biggest shape first, and it just creates a nice foundation for your entire design. Okay, super easy. Let's add the little cheekbones. 1869. I'm going to use the fill stitch again. I'm going to draw the shape. Because his face is tilted, I'm going to actually go ahead and change the orientation of the stitches to match the orientation of the way his face is tilted. Just a personal preference. I think my current fill stitch settings is the same as what I had it for this guy. Yeah, which I'm cool with. So I'm going to go ahead and leave that. And I'm going to copy and paste the shape and bring it over to the other side. Looks like it's tilted a little bit different, so I'm going to rotate it. Okay, so all the colors except for black are done now. Okay, draw with points, fill stitch. I'm going to change this color to black. And I'm going to change this orientation. Again, you don't really have to do this, and if you're a beginner, it usually is a little bit easier if you keep all the orientation standard as is. But totally up to you. This just means like if I change the orientation, when I'm compensating for push and pull, I want to make sure the pull compensation is compensated here and here, and the push compensation is considered here and here. But again, this is kind of a small shape. I won't care much if this oval is a little bit distorted because it's still going to be an oval. The shape is a little bit bigger. I think I'm going to bring the density down a little bit. And when I mean down, I mean looser, so it's actually a bigger number. All right, I'm going to copy and paste the shape, bring it over and rotate. Looking good. All right, let's do the mouth. I think I'm going to do a satin stitch for the mouth. Now I have StitchArtist Level 2, so I have this satin column tool, which allows me to draw the satin stitch like so. If you don't have it, you can just draw with points, satin column, and then draw the shape. Hold control if you want sharp corners. Okay, so I'm going to use the satin column. The satin column also has push and pull compensation that you need to consider. Again, if you want a little bit more detailed lesson about that, I have another video for the satin column. Right click to close the shape, and I'm going to clean up the shape a bit. You might prefer to make sure that the shape is nice and clean on the first pass instead of doing it like me, where I draw the initial shape quickly and then adjust after. And I know this looks really thick right now, but just a reminder that each of these boxes represent a millimeter, so this really is only about 2 millimeters thick. And if you don't know, these yellow lines represent the inclination of the stitch. It's the same yellow line that we see with the fill stitch, but the satin stitch, because it's usually a long, thin object, you do want to have multiple inclination points. The shape is pretty simple, so it's not too big of a deal. Honestly, I don't really know why I'm fussing with it so much. I think that's fine. Density. I think 4 point is good. Actually, I'm going to bring it down a little bit. I'm going to make it a little bit looser, so I'm going to bring the number up a bit. Length 4 is fine. For underlay, edge run parallel looks good to me. If you want it really dense, you could add zigzag, or if you want it a little bit looser, you can remove the parallel. I usually try to always at least have the edge run, unless it's a really thin shape. Okay, and now we can get started on the outline. And again, I'm going to use the satin column. And for the satin column, you're creating the inclinations as you go. And for this part, I'm pretty much going to follow the actual outline of the image, but I am making a little bit wider to compensate for the pull. Oh no, what happened? That's fine. Okay, so I don't know why I accidentally closed the shape here. And instead of deleting it and starting over, I'm just going to start a new shape and make sure they overlap so that you can't tell. Okay, once I get to this point, I'm going to close the shape, and then for this part of the ear, I'm actually going to make it a fill stitch. So I'm going to go ahead and do the fill stitch first. And I'm not too worried about how perfect it is because I'm going to do the satin column over it. And then where it meets this body color, I'm going to make sure it overlaps so that we don't have gaps. Okay, and then I'm going to continue the satin stitch around it. Okay, at this point, I feel like I'm getting really lazy with this outline shape, so before I move further, I think I'm just going to go ahead and fix the mess that I've made. Just going to clean up the shape a bit, clean up the inclination points. For this part where the two shapes meet, I want to make sure the end point of the first shape matches the beginning point of the next shape so that we don't have any awkward spaces. Same for this part, we're going in from the satin stitch to the fill stitch. We want to make sure the end point matches the start point of the next shape. And then at this point, I want to make sure this shape is going to end over here, and then I can start the next shape here. But actually, before I keep going, I'm going to make sure that this satin column stitch is at the setting that I want. So I'm going to go ahead and select all of these, not the mouth, because we already did that. I'm going to select these 3 shapes that I use. I'm actually using the command key to individually select these. So the density we have at 4.5, length 4. For underlay, I'm actually going to get rid of the parallel because I know that this is going to be a really small line and it's going to be really tight, and I'm worried that if I add the parallel underlay, it's just going to get too dense for my machine, especially because it has to go over some of these other layers of the embroidery thread. And that's just something you play around with and you get to know as you do more digitizing and do more trial and error. So, you know, you can try different underlay properties. I always like to use as little thread as possible. So I like to take away underlay, make my density looser, and make my thread stitches longer. And then after a test run, if I think that the stitch out isn't strong enough or it's a little bit too loose, then I'll go back and adjust. So I'm just going to continue drawing the rest of the shape. Again, for the ear, I'm going to make sure I do a fill stitch and overlap where the colors / shapes overlap. Okay, I took a little break because I realized Shaun White's final Olympic run was up, so if I sound a little bit different, it's actually the next day because I fell asleep after that. So anyways, I'm just going to continue with my satin column stitch, finishing this outline. I do try to remove excess nodes as much as possible because I believe your machine will stitch every time there's a node. Oh, and I don't think I've mentioned this yet, but if you want to get rid of some of this inclination, you can just click and drag it so it's on one side. And then if you ever need to add them, you can use this Add Inclinations button here. You click and drag and then right click to finish. Oh, and then I just need to make sure this start point matches the end point here. Because this line is so small, I don't think I want to do the satin stitch. There's a few different options. You can do a satin stitch, maybe make it a little bit wider and take out some of the underlay. I think I'm going to go with a line stitch. Right click to finish, and I think I'm going to make it a bean stitch, which means it'll stitch kind of back and forth. So if I do 5 pass, it'll go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, something like that. And then I just want to make sure it starts and ends back here so I can continue my shape. here I'm gonna make sure this shape starts and ends at the correct spot. You can start to see I'm getting kind of lazy setting up my stitches. Okay, that took quite some time. And before I do my first test run, I just want to make sure that I don't have any unnecessary jump stitches. So I'm just going to go in and go through the order of my colors that I have set and make sure it is the order that I want it to be. So we're starting with the base, and then we're going to the tummy, and right now I'm checking the start and end point and imagining where the jump stitches are going to be. Again, if you want to see it, you can just hold spacebar and click, and I can see that jump stitch appearing between these two buttons on his tummy. And because black is the most dominant color and it's the last one I'm using, I really want to make sure the order is correct. So we're going from eyeball to eyeball, and let's see, I'm going to have the mouth start over here. So it'll go from the eyeball here to the mouth there. Oops. And then this will jump down to this point, which I think I'm fine with. Let's move this over to the right.
So and here, start here, and here, start here, and here, start here, and here. So that's what I'm mostly checking for, start and end points.
Okay, so I'm pretty comfortable with where this is for at least the first test run. If you want to see how this is going to stitch out, you can go to the Stitch Stimulator and press play, and you can make it as slow or as fast as you want. And I always like to check how many stitches my entire embroidery design is. So right now we're at 6,438, which to me sounds pretty good, especially for an image this size and with all the outlining we did. So I'm pretty happy with that. I'm gonna go ahead and save this. I probably should have saved this earlier. It's definitely smarter to save as you go, but oh well. Oh, sorry. I meant to save a working file. So you want to save the working file as you go. And once you save the working file, then you can save the stitch file. Okay, so with the stitch file saved, I'm going to go ahead and do my first test run on my embroidery machine. For the test stitch, I just embroidered on some scrap fleece fabric that I had. And honestly, it came out so good for the first try. There were a few spots that I noticed while the machine was embroidering that were slightly misaligned, but when I pulled my hoop out of the machine, I realized that they were barely noticeable. But for perfectionist's sake, I did make those tiny edits back on my program, And I didn't do a second test stitch because I felt pretty confident that the final file was good to go. So I went ahead and embroidered the design on my crew neck. And this is the final result. It's so cute and clean and high quality, and I hope you were able to learn a thing or two by watching my process. Let me know in the comments what you would like to see next. Bye!